The very first amendment to the U.S. Constitution right here was ratified on December 17th, 1791. It's been around for a while and subject to evolving interpretations. But there is once again today, and particularly in the last few weeks, confusion and misconception about this most fundamental right that Americans hold, free speech. You know it's important because it's among the first amendments. It's called the first one, but it was ratified with a number of other amendments. And we need to start by ridding ourselves of the notion that many on today's political right actually care that much about free speech. Here's how you can tell. The same people who once posed as champions of free speech during the years when Donald Trump wasn't president are now demanding government sanction, criminal penalties, firings, and surveillance of those who criticize them. First Amendment scholar Marianne Franks warns that Donald Trump has unleashed the greatest assault on free speech since the Red Scare, all while simultaneously claiming to defend it. It's like if you say free speech often enough, the public might not notice that you're actually stripping it away. Here's how this is playing out. We've seen broadcast licenses threatened when networks aired speech that the ruling party doesn't like. We're in a wave of media mergers and deregulation of the media that is consolidating pro-Trump gatekeepers across platforms, from broadcast airwaves to social media. We're experiencing censorship by proxy, where government officials lean on private entities to suppress dissent. And the encouragement of ad hoc blacklisting. For example, when officials like Vice President J.D. Vance urge Americans to report their neighbors to employers for certain types of online speech. And of course, they claim all of this is being done in the name of free speech, which would be gaslighting, except gaslighting is just a lie. Doesn't feel like strong enough a word for a lie that undercuts one of our most important constitutional protections. So what's really going on? Why has today's GOP seemingly turned its back on free speech when under Biden all they did was claim its virtues? Longtime observers like Matt Stoller argue that the GOP has embraced a Hobbesian view of freedom, in which freedom really means domination. The 17th century English philosopher Thomas Hobbes argued that people owed obedience to a sovereign ruler, and failure to comply led to chaos. Stoller writes, quote, "Today that sovereign is Donald Trump. And in the zone of discretion he allows, there is liberty. Free speech in the context of the right means being free to use anti-woke rhetoric because such freedom is what a wise ruler allows. Trump may revoke these rights at any time since he is entrusted by a higher order to protect us. And this dynamic explains the inability of conservatives to criticize their leader or those above their station. They see the attack on the left as morally virtuous, the duty of a legitimate sovereign. And to the extent that there is criticism of Trump, it is for not being aggressive enough," end quote. In his world, in this worldview, alternative values like pluralism and multiculturalism and gender equality and racial justice are cast off as illegitimate. Stoller continues, their view of the non-right as a threat to life, liberty, and property isn't a result of recent events. It's fundamental to their value system. Since the New Deal, the right has bitterly contested the American institutional setup. It's why Donald Trump's allegations that the 2020 election was rigged found such purchase on the right. Even though most of them know that the vote counts were real, the left is just not legitimate under any circumstances, end quote. In an ideal world, democracies should absorb careless speech, bad jokes, bad takes, even vile remarks. That openness is democratic strength. But it's also its weakness. As writer and philosopher Sean Illing points out, democratic spaces can give way to any anti-democratic forces. In Weimar Germany, for example, before 1933, the explosion of new media gave voice to modern art and new ideas. But under the Third Reich, the new media quickly became Joseph Goebbels' tool for drowning democratic culture in authoritarian propaganda. Illing notes the same paradox living in our system. The openness that makes dissent possible also gives authoritarian forces room to weaponize speech against democracy itself. In the U.S. today, for example, the regulatory framework that was designed and intended to protect open broadcasting is being weaponized to punish Trump's critics. And more broadly, Illing warns the same wide-open environment that underpins free expression has made it possible for MAGA and its allies to increasingly dominate the public square. Quote, amplifying conspiracy theories, overwhelming fact-based journalism, and eroding the very conditions for shared reality. Steve Bannon openly bragged about flooding the zone with shit, exploiting the sheer volume of the open information environment to break the press. President Donald Trump's continual torrent of lies works the same way, and hostile actors abroad have learned to infiltrate these same open channels to destabilize democracies. Even some Republicans see the danger of this toxic media environment. Ted Cruz compared FCC Chair Brendan Carr's threats against ABC and its affiliates to something right out of Goodfellas, the mafia movie. Mitch McConnell, Pennsylvania Senator Dave McCormick, Indiana's Todd Young have all raised similar alarms. Maybe they believe in free speech, or maybe they just understand that their party won't always be in power and that one day these tools of repression, because that's what they have become, tools of repression, could easily be turned on them. This moment demands more than just exposing Republican hypocrisy. Franks argues that we need a fundamental rethinking of what the First Amendment actually is. For decades, we've treated it as this passive restraint on government. In reality, Franks warns the ruling party can aggressively target someone for their speech, and by the time a case winds through the courts, the damage is done. People learn to be quiet. The First Amendment, in other words, is not intervening in a protective way. It's doing the opposite of what we've told ourselves it does. And Franks, like Sean Illing, argues these contradictions are not new. They've always existed within our free speech tradition. It's the idea that, quote, we are a country that allows people to speak their minds freely, but if you don't agree with how we feel about ourselves or about our heroes, then you will be suppressed. Those who own the forum own the conversation. And Franks warns that we risk romanticizing the marketplace of ideas if we ignore this reality. Open markets, including the marketplace of ideas, don't just reward truth, they reward power. And without certain thoughtful intervention, stronger players dominate weaker ones, and minority views are trampled. Nowhere is that clearer than with this administration, which is not just leaning on tech companies, as Franks points out. It is one. The president owns his own social media platform. He uses it as a propaganda megaphone. Many major announcements appear first and only on that platform. Once upon a time, Republicans criticized the Biden administration for merely talking to tech companies about content. As Franks points out, today's fusion of tech, government, and propaganda should terrify anyone who still believes in an open public square, or that open public square matters. If we are serious about protecting speech, the First Amendment cannot be a passive shield against censorship. It has to be an affirmative right that actively protects dissent, the very thing upon which this country was founded before dissent is chilled out of existence, which means re-examining laws, regulatory powers, and incentives, the entire framework that we've built. It's worth pointing out the obvious here. If Republicans truly cared about the First Amendment, they could act right now. Ban jawboning by federal officials, eliminate the FCC's power to meddle in content, pass a federal law to protect citizens from frivolous lawsuits. Civil liberties groups already have the bills drafted and ready to go. Instead, the MAGA coalition spends its energy punishing critics and consolidating control. As The Atlantic's Connor Friedersdorf puts it, quote, my fear is that the MAGA coalition cares far more about punishing the left than about better securing even their own rights. Indeed, far from working to strengthen free speech protections, they're actively working to tear them down. Take New York Times v. Sullivan, the 1964 Supreme Court case that set the modern standard for libel. In Sullivan, the court ruled that public officials can't simply sue journalists or critics over mistakes. They must prove actual malice. That high bar, was designed to protect reporting and political criticism without fear of constant lawsuits. It's been reaffirmed by the courts for decades. Today, the very future of Sullivan is at risk. Well-funded lawyers working with the conservative movements like Libby Locke and Charles Harder, along with tech billionaires and well-connected oligarchs, are pushing to weaken U.S. defamation laws. And Justices Clarence Thomas and Neil Gorsuch have already signaled they'd be open to overturning it, which would make it far easier for public officials to sue their critics. As Pulitzer Prize-winning writer Louis Menand puts it, quote, there is little reason to assume that given the right occasion, this court will not overrule Sullivan, handing Trump another weapon in his war against free speech. Of course, if the law were to change, it might not be a total win for him. After all, no one is more reckless with the truth than Trump. He could be sued almost every time he opens his mouth, end quote. Positive free speech protects expression before the fact and encourages debate in good faith rather than debate that is designed to own the libs. If we don't change our conception of the First Amendment, the loudest voices shouting free speech will continue to be the ones who actually bury it. As Trump's unofficial censorship czar, Brendan Carr, recently warned, we can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way.